Trey Thompson was 37 years old, and he believed, the way a man believes in gravity, that a good father was worth more than any paycheck. He had given up a solid career managing logistics for a mid-size freight company out of Atlanta. He had given up the office, the title, the Tuesday morning meetings. He had given it all up voluntarily, without being asked, without complaint, because he had looked at his newborn daughter sleeping on his chest one quiet Tuesday morning and thought, someone needs to be here for these children, and that someone is going to be me. That was 6 years ago. What he found in my wife's car on a warm Thursday morning in Decatur, Georgia, would shatter every quiet sacrifice he had ever made. It was a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines, tucked inside a crumpled paper bag, wedged between the passenger seat and the center console of Hyundai's silver Toyota Camry. Here is what made Trey's blood run cold. Hyundai had been home for 4 days. The test had been taken 6 days earlier. Right in the middle of her business trip to Nashville, he had no idea. Not yet. But a door was beginning to crack open in the back of his mind. And what was on the other side was going to change everything. Hyundai was flying home from her 3rd work trip in 2 months. She was a marketing director for a consumer goods company based in Buckhead, and she traveled often. Trey never complained. He kissed her forehead, waved from the porch, and went back inside to handle everything himself. The morning of her return, he had been up since just past 6. He made oatmeal with sliced bananas and honey, Amari's favorite. He helped Zuri into her school uniform and fixed the little pink bow in her hair. 3 tries, because Zuri kept tilting her head toward the cartoon on the kitchen counter. He got both children onto the school bus by 7:45. Then he walked back up the driveway and decided, on an impulse born from love, to clean Hyundai's car before she got home. He thought simply, she'll be tired. It would be nice if her car was clean. That is the kind of man Trey Thompson was. A man whose love lived in the small, unannounced gestures that nobody asked for and nobody noticed, but somebody always benefited from. The vacuum whined. The Georgia morning was warm, carrying the faint smell of cut grass from down the block on Tony Drive. A mockingbird ran through its repertoire in the oak tree at the corner of their yard. Normal. All of it completely normal. He started with the back seat. Juice box straws, goldfish crumbs, one of Zuri's rubber hair ties. He smiled at the mess and cleaned it without thinking. Then he moved to the front. His fingers swept between the passenger seat and the console and closed around a crumpled paper bag. Inside, wrapped in a folded paper towel, was a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. Trey did not move. The vacuum was still screaming, but he could no longer hear it. He sank slowly into the driver's seat, the test in his hand, and stared until his eyes began to burn. "No," he whispered. "No. That's impossible." His hands were trembling, the way a man trembles when his body understands something his mind is still refusing to accept. In that moment, Trey was experiencing cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding 2 conflicting beliefs at once. My wife loves me and would never betray me, and this evidence says otherwise. The mind's first instinct is not anger, it is denial, reaching for any explanation that lets the safer belief survive a little longer. That is not weakness. That is the brain protecting itself from a pain it is not yet ready to absorb. He sat in that driveway for a long time. The vacuum kept running. And Trey Thompson, the man who had given up everything to be present for his family, had no idea that the pregnancy test was only the very first piece of what was about to come undone. Stay with us, because what Trey discovered next, buried in a banking app he almost didn't open, would make that pregnancy test look like the smallest part of the story. Here is something nobody tells you about being a stay-at-home father. The world does not hold a place for you at the table. You are not the man bringing home a paycheck, so people quietly treat you as if you are somehow less than a man. You are not the woman managing the household in the way society still silently expects, so you don't get credit for that either. You exist in a kind of in-between space, present, doing everything, recognized by almost no one. And rather than figure out where you fit, most people simply look past you. Trey had felt that looking past for years. He felt it at school pickup, standing among a cluster of mothers who smiled politely, but never quite included him in their conversations. He felt it at church, where men his age talked about careers and commutes and promotions, and Trey would nod and say, "I'm home with the kids right now," and watch their faces rearrange into something they were working hard to disguise. He had felt it from Jindai, too. Though it had come on so slowly, he had almost missed it. 3 months before he found the pregnancy test, Trey was folding laundry in the bedroom on a Sunday afternoon. Zuri's little socks, Amari's school shirts, Jindai's work blouses pressed flat and stacked neatly. When Jindai came in and leaned against the doorframe, a glass of wine in her hand, and an expression on her face he couldn't quite read. "You're home so much now," she said, almost lightly, almost like it was just conversation. "Do you ever feel like you're not really the man anymore?" She laughed a little when she said it, like it was a joke. Trey looked up at her, held her gaze for one quiet moment, then looked back down at the laundry and kept folding. He did not answer, because the truth was, he didn't know how to answer something like that, without it becoming bigger than a Sunday afternoon was supposed to hold. So he let it go. He should have known then. Relationship psychologist Dr. John Gottman spent decades studying couples and identified contempt, the belief that your partner is beneath you, as the single most reliable predictor of divorce. It is more corrosive than conflict and more dangerous than anger because it does not arrive suddenly. It seeps in slowly, disguised as a joke, a raised eyebrow, an offhand comment delivered with a laugh. Jindai's question, "Do you still feel like the man?" was not thoughtless conversation. It was an early signal that something far more dangerous had already taken root inside her view of her husband. Whenever Jindai traveled for work, the house was entirely Trey's. Not partially, not mostly, entirely. He woke before 6 every morning, made breakfast, packed lunches, and got 2 children dressed and out the door. He spent his afternoons shuttling Amari to soccer practice at Redan Park and Zuri to her Wednesday afternoon art class on Panthersville Road. He helped Amari with 3rd grade math at the kitchen table after dinner. Both of them bent over a worksheet under the dining room light until the numbers finally made sense. He read to Zuri every night, always the same story, always the little lost bear, until her eyes grew heavy and her breathing slowed into sleep. Some nights, around 2 in the morning, Zuri would wake from a nightmare. Trey would hear her before she even called out. He would lift her from her bed, carry her through the dark hallway of their house on Tony Drive, past the family photos on the wall, past the little shelf where the children's artwork was displayed, and walk slow circles through the living room until her crying softened into hiccups and then into sleep against his shoulder. He would stand there in the dark for a few extra minutes after, just holding her, not in a hurry to put her down. That was his life. That was what he had chosen to build. And he was not ashamed of a single part of it. When Jindai came home from Nashville, Trey waited until the children were in bed before he sat across from her at the kitchen table and set the pregnancy test between them. "Jindai, I found this in your car this morning when I was cleaning it for you." Her expression moved through 3 things in less than 2 seconds: surprise, calculation, then tears. "Oh my God," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Trey, that's my sister's. She asked me to pick one up because she was too embarrassed to go herself. Are you seriously suspicious of me right now, after everything I've been carrying? And she cried, not a little, but with her whole face, reaching across the table for his hands. Baby, I love you. I would never. Do you hear me? I would never. What Jindai did in that moment is a textbook example of gaslighting, a manipulation tactic where the person who caused the harm redirects the conversation to make the other person feel guilty for asking the question. Notice the structure. She didn't address the evidence. She reframed Trey as the problem, as suspicious, unreasonable, the one causing harm. The tears weren't incidental. Studies in emotional manipulation show that crying is one of the most effective tools for short-circuiting a partner's critical thinking, because it triggers the empathy response, the very instinct that makes good people vulnerable to those who exploit their love. Trey looked at his wife's face and felt something in his chest loosen, because he still loved her. Because he could still remember who she used to be, her laugh in their first apartment in East Atlanta, the way she used to call him on her lunch break just to hear his voice. He exhaled. He pulled her into a hug. He let himself believe her, because believing her was less painful than the alternative. He held her for 10 seconds. Then she whispered, "I need to freshen up," and walked to the bathroom. And Trey sat alone at the kitchen table. His phone was still in front of him, their shared banking app still open from when he had checked the grocery budget that morning. He scrolled, not looking for anything specific, and then he stopped cold. 3 transfers, each one to the same account. 11 days, $1,200, $1,500, $2,100. The account name? Marcus Hale. He didn't know a Marcus Hale. He searched the name quietly that night, long after Jindai had gone to bed. The results came back quickly. Marcus Hale, 38, a real estate entrepreneur based in Buckhead. Polished LinkedIn profile, charity gala photos, married to Tasha Hale. Trey stared at that name on his phone screen, and something cold moved through him. Because Tasha was Jindai's best friend. He set the phone down. He went back to Jindai's car one more time, opened the trunk, and found what he had not yet looked for. Tucked beside her work bag, a folded Victoria's Secret receipt. Beneath it, a hotel invoice from the Omni Nashville Hotel. A room billed for 2 nights under Jindai Thompson's name. He stood at the open trunk in the quiet of the driveway. A porch light was on down the block. He could hear the television playing faintly inside the house. He closed the trunk. He walked back inside. He put on the same face he always wore. The next morning, Amari came downstairs blinking with sleepy eyes and said quietly, "Daddy, is Mommy mad at you? The other day she told me you don't love her anymore." Trey felt his heart tighten so hard he could barely draw a breath. But he touched his son's face and said, "I love your mom, and I love you. I'm right here, buddy." He turned back to the stove. He kept his voice even. He made the oatmeal. And that night, sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, he scrolled to a name in his contacts he had hoped he would never need to use. Because the man Trey was about to call, a private investigator named Terrell, would send him photographs 3 days later that would reveal a betrayal so personal it would bring the whole neighborhood to its knees. Trey had never in his life hired a private investigator. He had never thought he would be the kind of man who needed one. He used to hear those stories, a friend of a friend, some cautionary tale passed in low voices after church, and he would think quietly, "That would never be me and my wife. We are not that." But he sat in his parked car in the Kroger lot on Candler Road at 9:30 on a Friday morning, and he made the call. Detective Raymond Terrell answered on the second ring. He was a former DeKalb County investigator who now worked domestic cases out of a small office off Memorial Drive. His voice was calm and unhurried, the voice of a man who had heard every version of this story and still treated each one with dignity. Trey spoke quietly and plainly. He gave Terrell the name from the bank transfers, the hotel invoice, the dates. "Give me 72 hours, Terrell said. Trey drove home, made lunch, and waited. Psychologists who study betrayal trauma describe the period between suspicion confirmed and evidence received as one of the most psychologically damaging phases a person can endure. The brain runs the same questions in an endless loop, scanning every memory, every small detail, every moment that now looks different in hindsight. Sleep becomes shallow, appetite disappears, ordinary tasks feel performed rather than lived. This is not weakness. This is the nervous system's natural response to an unresolved threat, holding the body in a state of alert until the truth either arrives or dissolves. Trey was not falling apart. He was doing precisely what a human brain does when it knows something is wrong but cannot yet act on it. The waiting was its own quiet suffering. Trey had to cook dinner on Friday and act normal. He had to take the children to Amari's Saturday morning soccer practice at Redan Park, sit in a folding chair on the sidelines, and cheer when his son dribbled past a defender. He had to go to church on Sunday morning, sit beside Jendai in the fourth pew from the front, and sing hymns with her perfume in the air next to him. He said grace before Sunday dinner, Zuri's small fingers in his left hand, Amari's slightly larger ones in his right. He bowed his head and asked the Lord to bless their food and their family. His voice did not tremble once. He wasn't sure how. After the children were asleep each night, he sat in the kitchen in the dark with a cup of coffee gone cold and stared at nothing. A freelance consulting project for a logistics firm in Smyrna sat unfinished on his laptop. He could not make himself open it. Instead, he sat with the knowledge he already had and waited for the knowledge he did not yet have to arrive. Now, before the photographs came, it is important to stop and understand something. Because knowing who Marcus Hale was married to changed the entire shape of this story. Tasha Hale was Jendai's best friend. Not a casual acquaintance, a genuine best friend, the kind built over years and dinners and late-night phone calls, and the kind of trust that most people only get once or twice in a lifetime. 2 weeks earlier, Tasha had shown up on their doorstep in Decatur with a full pot of chicken soup because she had heard Jendai was overwhelmed from work travel. Trey had opened the door and found her standing there with the pot in both hands, wearing a concerned smile. "I just wanted to check on you all," she had said. Tasha was the woman who had organized Zuri's 6th birthday party at the park, the one with the purple streamers and the little butterfly cake, because Jendai was traveling that weekend and Tasha did not want the little girl to go without a celebration. Tasha was the woman who had stood in Trey and Jendai's kitchen, wrapped her arms around Jendai, and said with complete sincerity, "I'm here for you. Whatever you're going through, you can tell me." Trey had watched that moment from the doorway and felt genuinely grateful. He had thought, "My wife is lucky to have a friend like that." He had no idea, not yet, that those words were being spoken by the wife of the man Jendai was sleeping with. What makes this particular situation so psychologically layered is that Jendai was not only betraying her husband, she was looking Tasha in the eyes, accepting her soup, accepting her kindness, accepting her loyalty, while simultaneously violating the most fundamental trust that friendship is built on. Researchers in moral psychology describe this as relational duplicity, the ability to maintain warmth and closeness in one relationship while actively destroying it through hidden behavior. The emotional damage this creates for the deceived party, both the spouse and the friend, goes far beyond the individual betrayal. It makes the person question their own judgment, their own ability to read the people closest to them. Terrell called Monday morning at 8:42, right after Trey put the children on the school bus. "Check your phone," Terrell said simply. The photos came through in a secure link, still images pulled from the hallway security camera system at the Omni Nashville Hotel. Trey opened them at the kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee in front of him. First image, Jendai and Marcus Hale walking down a hotel corridor, his hand at the small of her back. Second image, the two of them stopped outside a room door, kissing, not a brief or ambiguous moment, but a slow, deliberate one that left nothing open to interpretation. Third image, Jendai with her left hand raised. She was removing her wedding ring. She slipped it into her purse. Then they went inside. Trey looked at that third image for a long time. The deliberate, practiced motion of it. The ring disappearing into the purse as easily as if it had never carried any meaning at all. He did not feel rage. What he felt, strangely, was clarity. Cold and absolute, like a fog that had been sitting over everything for weeks had simply burned away in a single moment, leaving only what was true. He picked up his phone and called his attorney. When confronted with undeniable evidence of betrayal, many people report experiencing something unexpected. Not an explosion of rage, but a strange, hollow calm. Psychologists call this emotional dissociation, the mind's emergency override when incoming pain exceeds what the system can process in real time. The emotional centers temporarily go quiet, and the brain shifts into functional mode, allowing the person to make decisions, take action, and keep moving forward. This is not the absence of feeling. It is the body buying time. The grief will come in full. But first, the man has to make the call. He did not confront Jendai that evening. Instead, he cooked dinner. Lemon herb chicken with rice and green beans. He helped Amari with his reading comprehension worksheet at the dining room table. He bathed Zuri and put her to bed with the little lost bear. The same story, the same soft voice, the same ending where the little bear finds its way home through the dark forest and its mother is waiting at the door. "Did the bear make it home, Daddy?" Zuri asked, the way she asked every single time. "He always makes it home," Trey said. He kissed her forehead. He turned off the lamp. He stood outside her door in the dark hallway and felt the full weight of everything settle onto him. The grief, the exhaustion, the particular loneliness of being completely betrayed by someone you chose with your whole heart. Then he straightened up, and he walked to the kitchen to do the dishes, because his children needed their world to stay standing for one more night. And Trey Thompson had always been the one who kept it standing. What Trey had not yet braced for was the moment Jendai looked him straight in the eye, reached for the one card she believed would stop him cold, and revealed something about his own son that no father should ever have to hear. Trey waited until Wednesday afternoon, with both children safely at school and a full, quiet day ahead. He sat down across from Jendai at the kitchen table, the same table where they had eaten 1,000 meals together, where the children had done homework and drawn pictures and spilled juice and slowly grown up. And he placed his attorney's business card on the surface between them. Beside it, the printed hotel invoice, the Victoria's Secret receipt, the bank transfer records, 3 transfers, $4,800, the name Marcus Hale in clear black type, and the photographs. Jendai looked at the photographs. She did not speak. When she finally raised her eyes to his, they were wet. Her face, always so composed, always so carefully put together, was beginning to come apart. "Trey, I'm filing for divorce," he said. His voice was level, not cold, not theatrical, just level, the way a man speaks when he has already done his grieving in private, and what remains now is simply the truth. "And I'm filing for full custody of Amari and Zuri." Many people assume the confrontation is the most painful moment in a betrayal story. Psychologists who work with betrayed partners often find the opposite to be true. The confrontation can bring a form of relief because it ends the unbearable suspension of knowing something and being unable to act on it. The real suffering happened earlier, in the sleepless nights, the cold coffee, the forced smiles. By the time Trey sat down with that folder, he had already absorbed the worst of the grief in private. What he was doing now was not falling apart. He was closing a wound that had been left open too long. What happened next was not what he expected. Jindai did not try to deny the photographs. She did not construct another story. Instead, she began to sob, deep, unsteady sobs, and she pressed both hands over her face and said the words that hit Trey like something physical. "You can't do this. Trey, I'm pregnant." The room went very quiet. And, her voice fractured further, "I told Amari a few weeks ago. I told him that his father didn't love Mommy anymore, that Mommy had to find someone else because his father stopped caring." Trey sat completely still. He thought about his son's face at bedtime weeks ago, those serious 8-year-old eyes looking up at him in the dark, asking, "Daddy, is Mommy mad at you?" "She said you don't love her anymore." Trey had believed it was a child misunderstanding adult tension. He had smoothed it over with a smile and a hug and the words, "I'm right here, buddy." He had not known, in that moment, that his wife had planted that seed deliberately. Piece by piece, like a slow and quiet poison, building a narrative in his son's mind so that when the time came to push Trey out, the children would already have a reason to doubt him. What Jindai did to Amari carries a clinical name: parental alienation, the deliberate act of turning a child against the other parent through persistent negative messaging. Psychologists and family therapists consider it a form of emotional harm directed at both the child and the targeted parent, because it weaponizes the child's love and trust to damage a relationship that child depends on. Research shows that children exposed to this kind of manipulation often carry deep confusion, guilt, and difficulty forming secure attachments well into adulthood. Jindai did not only betray her husband, she put her own son's psychological stability at risk to protect her own story. Trey set both hands flat on the table. "Is this baby mine?" he asked. Jindai went completely silent. The silence stretched, long enough to be its own answer. She collapsed into tears again, and then, through them, she made one final attempt. "Please, Trey, we can figure this out. For the children, for the baby. Please don't destroy our family." He let her finish. Then he spoke, quietly, without anger, but with the kind of steadiness that carries more weight than shouting ever could. "You told our son his father didn't love his mother anymore. You were preparing to take my children away from me. And you looked at 6 years of me waking up before sunrise to make their breakfast, carrying Zuri through the dark at 2 in the morning when she was frightened, helping Amari with his homework when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. You looked at all of that and decided I was weak. You stopped seeing me as a man the day I stopped bringing in a paycheck." His voice was trembling now. Not breaking, just trembling, the way something does when it is carrying more than it was built to hold. "You weren't only betraying me. You were betraying every year I gave to this family." Trey's words, "You stopped seeing me as a man the day I stopped bringing in a paycheck," speak to one of the most deeply embedded cultural wounds in American family life. Psychologists and gender researchers call this the provider identity trap, the conditioned belief still prevalent across many communities that a man's value is tied directly to his economic output. When a man steps out of the earner role, even voluntarily, even sacrificially, he risks becoming invisible in his partner's eyes, because the surrounding culture has trained both of them to measure his worth in dollars rather than in devotion. Trey did not lose his masculinity when he stayed home. He expressed it in a different and arguably more demanding form. But Jindai had absorbed a definition of manhood that couldn't hold space for what he was offering. Jindai had gone still, Her hands were in her lap. The crying had stopped. Trey stood, picked up the business card, and slid the documents back into the folder. "The papers will be served this week. My attorney will be in touch about the children." He walked out of the kitchen. Later that same day, Trey drove to Tasha Hale's house. He had gone back and forth about whether it was his place, but he kept seeing Tasha in his memory, standing in their kitchen with a pot of chicken soup, her face open and completely unaware. And he knew. She deserves the truth from someone who isn't going to lie to her. Tasha answered the door in a sweatshirt and bare feet. When she saw Trey's expression, something in her face shifted immediately. "Trey, what happened?" He handed her a small envelope with copies of the photographs inside. He said, "I'm sorry, Tasha. I truly am." And he left. He learned later, through their pastor, through the way quiet truths travel in close communities, that Tasha had sat down on her kitchen floor when she opened that envelope and had not moved for a very long time. Tasha's collapse on that kitchen floor illustrates what trauma therapists call secondary betrayal, the experience of being betrayed not by a romantic partner, but by a trusted friend. Research indicates that betrayal by a close friend can be as psychologically destabilizing as betrayal by a spouse, because friendship carries its own explicit promise of loyalty and safety. For Tasha, the person she had brought soup to, organized birthday parties for, and held in her arms saying, "I am here for you," that very person had looked her in the eye and chosen her husband. The injury wasn't only to Tasha's marriage, it was to the entire architecture of trust she had built her life around. The hardest night came 3 days later. Trey sat on the edge of the bathroom tub, door locked, fan running, and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He sat with the full weight of it, not just the affair, not just the divorce in motion, but the specific grief of understanding that the woman he had loved had looked at the thing he was most proud of, the presence, the sacrifice, the daily choosing of his children over everything else, and had seen something lesser in it. That was the part that cut the deepest. Then Zuri's small voice came through the hallway. "Daddy?" He splashed cold water on his face. He dried his hands. He unlocked the door, walked down the hall, and pushed open her bedroom door with a smile that was tired but real. "Hey, baby girl, you okay?" Zuri reached her arms up from her bed, the uncomplicated, absolute trust of a 6-year-old reaching for the person she was certain would always be there. Trey lifted her up and held her against his chest. He was still standing. His children still had him. That was enough to take one more step. The consequences for Jendai were only just beginning to arrive. And when they came in front of everyone who had ever known her name. The divorce papers were served on a Tuesday morning. Not at the house on Tony Drive, not in the quiet privacy of a living room, where Jendai could manage the setting and control the moment. At her office. The 14th floor of a glass building in Buckhead, where she was a marketing director with a business card and a conference room reserved in her name. A woman her colleagues had known for 5 years as polished, ambitious, and put together. A process server walked through the lobby, rode the elevator, and handed Jendai Thompson her divorce papers in the hallway outside her office at 10:47 in the morning. She tried to hold her composure. She almost managed it. But the exhibits attached to those documents, the bank transfer records, the hotel invoice, the photographs, were thorough, factual, and completely damning. Within 2 days, the story had moved through their church community and across their neighborhood in Decatur the way fire moves through dry grass in August. The full shape of it was devastating. The affair, the money transfers, the identity of the man involved. Because Marcus Hale was Tasha's husband. Tasha, who everyone in that community loved and trusted. The betrayal landed not only on a marriage, it landed on an entire social fabric, and people felt it personally. For many people who engage in infidelity, the private destruction of the marriage feels somehow contained. The affair exists in a separate mental compartment, kept away from daily reality by secrecy. What they rarely prepare for is the social consequence. The moment the secret becomes public, and the community that once reflected back a flattering image suddenly begins to reflect something else entirely. Psychologists call this the collapse of social identity, and it is often experienced as more immediately devastating than the legal consequences of divorce. Jendai had built her identity around being seen as capable and admirable. That identity began dissolving publicly, and no version of a repackaged story could contain it. Tasha filed for divorce from Marcus Hale within the week, and she cut Jendai off completely, not with a confrontation, not with a tearful phone call, but with a silence so absolute it carried the weight of a final verdict. No texts, no replies. Jendai simply disappeared from Tasha's life as if she had never been in it. For Jendai, the consequences arrived in layered waves. The first was social, the quiet shift at church, the coworkers who found reasons to reschedule meetings, the mothers at school pickup who smiled briefly and moved on. Jendai was skilled at projecting confidence, but confidence requires an audience that is at least partially on your side, and that audience was shrinking. The second wave was professional. Following the internal circulation of the scandal's details, there were conversations at her company that she was not part of. Within 6 weeks, she had been transitioned out of her director role. The official language was restructuring. The actual language was quieter and harder to dispute. The third wave was the most personal, and the cruelest. Marcus Hale had never intended to leave Tasha for Jendai. He had been a man running 2 lives, and when both collapsed simultaneously, he did what men like Marcus Hale typically do. He lawyered up, went silent, and focused on protecting his assets and reputation, with no visible concern for the woman who had set her own life on fire for him. Studies on long-term infidelity outcomes consistently reveal one of the most painful ironies in these stories. The majority of people who sacrifice stable relationships for an affair partner do not end up building lasting connections with that person. The affair was never a real relationship. It was a fantasy relationship, sustained by secrecy, excitement, and freedom from ordinary friction. When those conditions disappear, so does the attraction. Jendai had risked her marriage, her career, and her closest friendship for a man who had never offered her anything real, only the temporary illusion of being chosen. Throughout all of this, every wave, every consequence, every fallout rolling through the world outside his front door, Trey Thompson did what he had always done. He got up in the morning. He made breakfast. He took the children to school. There were nights when the house felt enormous, and the silence in it carried a weight it hadn't held before. A permanent kind of quiet, different from Jendai's business trips, which had always carried the promise of return. This silence had no such promise. Trey had to learn to live inside it, the way you learn to live with any real loss. Not all at once, but in small daily increments, each morning fractionally more manageable than the one before. Some nights, after the children were asleep, he sat at the kitchen table alone and let himself feel the weight of everything quietly. Then he dried his eyes, went to bed, and woke up the next morning. And when Amari came downstairs blinking in the early light and asked, "What's for breakfast, Daddy?" Trey smiled and said, "What do you want?" Every single morning, without fail. The custody hearing was conducted in Fulton County Family Court, Judge Marion Elkins presiding. Derek Hollins presented the case simply and factually. Trey Thompson had been the primary caregiver of both children for 6 years. School records, medical appointment logs, teacher communications, and character testimony from neighbors and the children's pediatrician on Covington Highway. All of it documenting, in plain terms, what Trey had simply been doing every day without fanfare. The court granted Trey full primary custody of Amari and Zuri. When Derek called with the news, Trey was sitting in the school pickup line on Covington Highway, waiting for the bell. He said simply, "Thank you, Derek." Then he set the phone down on the passenger seat. And he waited, patiently, without drama, without any need to announce the moment, for his children to come running through the school doors. They both saw him at the same time. They both started running. Zuri reached the car first, the way she always did, because she had never once learned how to be slow about anything she loved. And the man who had once been asked by his own wife if he still felt like the man, that man was about to build something so quietly beautiful that every sacrifice would finally, completely, make sense. 6 months later, the house on Tony Drive had a different feeling to it. Not a perfect feeling. Life with 2 children, a freelance business, and a fresh divorce is never perfect. There were still chaotic mornings when Zuri refused to wear any shoes that weren't her purple ones, which were, of course, in the wash. There were evenings when Trey was bone-tired and still had 2 hours of consulting work left after the children were in bed. But the house had warmth in it now, real warmth, the honest kind that doesn't require anyone to perform. He had grown his freelance logistics consulting to 3 steady clients, 2 freight operators out of Forest Park, and an e-commerce startup in Midtown. He worked during school hours, built something sustainable, and carried none of the shame that other people had tried to attach to work that looked less than. Amari was thriving. His 3rd-grade teacher sent home a note praising his growth in reading confidence. He had been chosen to read aloud at the school's fall literacy evening. Trey sat in the gymnasium off Covington Highway and clapped until his palms ached. He didn't care who saw. Zuri was sleeping through the night more often. On the nights the nightmares still came, she called out for her father. And he was always there. Some things, at least, you could count on absolutely. Her name was Nia. Trey met her through a mutual friend from church at a quiet Saturday cookout on someone's back porch in Panthersville. Nia was standing near the grill, talking to someone's grandmother, laughing at something the older woman had said. Full and unguarded and completely unself-conscious. She was 34, a black woman who had walked through her own painful divorce 2 years earlier and come out the other side with her dignity intact. She had a 7-year-old son named Kofi, who loved dinosaurs with encyclopedic intensity. She worked as an elementary school reading specialist, spending her days coaxing confidence out of children 1 page at a time. She understood, without needing it explained, what it meant to put your children first. What it meant to love someone quietly and consistently without requiring applause. They took things slowly, coffee first. Then Sunday morning walks along the path trail off DeKalb Avenue while Kofi rode his bike ahead and Trey's children tried to keep up. They talked about their real lives, not the curated versions, but the actual ones, with all the imperfect edges still attached. It was easy, the way real things are easy. Not effortless, easy. There is a meaningful difference between the two. One Sunday evening in late November, the house on Tony Drive was full. Nia was in the kitchen making her grandmother's sweet potato soup, kept on a slightly food-stained index card she claimed was a family heirloom and guarded with complete seriousness. Kofi and Amari were deep in debate about whether a T-Rex or a Triceratops would win in a direct confrontation. Zuri had appointed herself the official judge and was taking her responsibilities very seriously. Trey was on the living room floor, serving as construction consultant, while Zuri directed her block set architectural project. He was laughing, not because anything was particularly funny, but because his daughter was explaining her vision with the focused gravity of a city planner, and something about the whole moment was so uncomplicated and warm, his chest felt like it might overflow. He could smell the soup. He could hear his son's voice rising with excitement down the hallway. Then Amari appeared in the doorway, face bright and unhurried. "Daddy, I like being home with you." Just like that. No preamble. Simply an obvious fact that needed to be spoken aloud. Trey looked at his son. Something stung quietly behind his eyes. He smiled. And softly, so softly that only he could hear, Trey Thompson said to himself, "I am not weak. I am just a father who wanted his children to grow up surrounded by complete love." This story reminds us of something most of us already know but rarely say out loud. If you have loved someone quietly for decades, cooked their favorite meals, folded their clothes, sat beside them through the long, ordinary nights, and now you eat dinner alone, or sleep on your side of a bed that feels too wide, or reach for the phone to call someone who is no longer there, that love did not disappear. It is still in your hands. It is still in the way you set the table. This week, pull out one dish you used to make together. Cook it on a Tuesday, not a holiday. Eat it slowly. Let yourself remember exactly who taught you the recipe and why you still make it the same way they did. That is not grief. That is devotion that outlasted the person it was given to. And devotion like that, quiet, daily, unglamorous, was never weakness. It was always the strongest thing in the room. Have you ever watched a truly good man be overlooked by someone who didn't deserve him? Type yes or I know one in the comments, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today. Real people wrote these scripts with passion and purpose to spark reflection and change. AI was merely a helpful tool that polished the delivery, making sure profound messages about respect, redemption, and human dignity reached as many hearts as possible. Production team, story and screenplay by Quinn Fung. Character development and visual conceptualization by Chris Nguyen. Video scripting and scene adaptation by David Nguyen. A passionate team dedicated to bringing this story to life.